Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you a few thoughts on this second Sunday of Lent. Is there a cry that children offer their parents that is so difficult to listen to, worse than that of, but you promised, you promised? Like, for example, if you told the kids you were going to take them to Disneyland on Sunday or go to the beach this weekend, and then something comes up and you just can't make it. And you say to the kids, yeah, I know we talked about going to the beach, but we just can't make it this weekend. And the lament goes to the heavens. But you promised, you promised. You know, I think kids aren't the only ones who talk that way. I think adults do too. And they do it with God. We do it because we offer God our prayers and they don't get answered. And we say, but you promised, God, you promised that if we prayed, you would respond, that if we were good, we would be rewarded. You promised that this world would get better, the hungry would go fed, that justice would be served. You promised. Where did we ever get that idea? Where did we ever get the idea that God made us all of these promises? That he promised what? Basically, he would create heaven on earth? Sometimes because we have the world the way it is that can be so frustrating or confusing to us, we can find God frustrating and confusing. And it may be hard for us to understand him. And worse than that, we may just want to give up on him altogether. And if there is a God, he just doesn't care about us, or it's an impotent God. I think if we want to understand God, we need to understand the transfiguration, which is this Sunday's gospel. One of the things that intrigues me when I'm watching public speakers speak is they often have a person doing sign language off to the side. And I think I'm more intrigued by that person than the speaker, because I'm always trying to match up all of the signs that they are offering with the words that are being spoken. And it kind of catches my curiosity, because I see them gesturing and I'm thinking, oh, is that how you say budget in sign language? Or is that how you say government in sign language? And I find it fascinating. I think the story of the Transfiguration is God's sign language to us. And we have to understand these gestures if we want to understand what it is that God is trying to say to us. And we all know the story. It begins with Jesus going up the mountain, and with him are Peter, James, and John, three men climbing the mountain. And in Scripture, the only people who climb mountains are those who are searching for God. In the Scriptures, we see Moses climb a mountain. Elijah climbs a mountain. Why? Because they're looking for God. And those three apostles, as they climb the mountain, they enter into this cloud, this mysterious presence of God surrounding them, just as did Moses and Elijah in their experiences on the mountain. And both Moses and Elijah speaking to Jesus. Moses representing the summation of the law, and Elijah representing one of the greatest of all the prophets, all of the prophecies. And we have there all of God's revelation, the law, the prophets, both speaking to Jesus, who is being transformed into dazzling white. And then at voice, speaking, "This is my beloved Son." Or in other words, all of these signs, all of these gestures, all indicating that Jesus Christ is the summation of God's revelation. He is the main focal point. And it is God's way of saying to us that you are now seeing life beyond life. Whether the disciples could recognize it in that moment or not, they were witnessing what resurrected life looked like when the human becomes fully divine. Or In short, what the disciples were experiencing was what I like to call a God moment. We've all had God moments. One of those moments in our life where we know that we are in the presence of God and we know that He is revealing Himself to us. I was talking with this one young man who was getting ready to get married, and I asked him the question, how did he know that time when he was certain that this was the woman he wanted to marry? And he said to me that there was one evening where he was sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, soon to be fiance. He was sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, and they were holding hands watching TV. And he said there was this one moment where he looked down and he saw his fingers and her fingers, and just for a moment, he couldn't distinguish whose fingers were whose. And in that moment, he said he just knew it right then. Two had become one, that he had to marry her. And in that moment, he knew what it was that he had to do with his life. For him, that was a God moment, a moment that he wanted to live in forever. I think we've all had those God moments. You parents, when you had your firstborn child in your arms for that very first time, and you were holding that child, this one dad told me it was in that moment that suddenly he knew all that he needed to know about himself and his life. That little child was 100% dependent upon him for everything, for life, for care, for food. And all he wanted to do for the rest of his life was take care of that little baby girl in his arms. For him, it was a God moment of revelation. And when you're in those God moments, holding hands, holding that baby, those are the moments that you want to live forever and you want to live in forever. No wonder that Peter called out in that moment on the mountain, Lord, how good it is for us to be here. We'll build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. In other words, we don't want to leave. We want to stay right here in this God moment forever. We've all had God moments. I remember one I had a couple years ago. I was in a parish in south central Los Angeles, Nativity. And it's a heavily Latino parish. And if you've ever been in a Latino parish, you know that the wonderful thing about Latinos is they take care of all of their church business on Sunday, right there on the church steps, right after Mass. If you're going to need a baptism, a wedding, a quinceañera, a funeral, whatever it's going to happen, you're going to solve it right there on those church steps. So it's real common for a priest to have a lot of people all around him, and you got your calendars out and you're trying to figure things out. Well, one Sunday, when I had this gaggle of people around me, somebody just kept tugging on my chasuble, and it kind of bothered me a little bit, but I was doing what I was doing, and that tugging kept on. And finally, I just got a little bit irritated. And I just turned, what? And there was this woman who was there with her daughters, and she was just weeping. And then I realized, oh my gosh. So I told everybody to hang on, and I turned to her, and she told me that her beloved aunt, whom obviously she deeply loved, had just died. And she was there with her daughters at Mass praying for her and wondered if I would say a few prayers. And so I, of course. So we just kind of huddled together off to the side, away from everybody, and we started saying our prayers together. And her grief was so profound. I mean, I've been a priest for a long time, and I've seen a lot of people crying at funerals. I just had never seen anybody that grief struck. And as we are bowing our heads, I'm seeing the tears falling to the concrete below and staining the stone. So deep was her sorrow. And one of her daughters was obviously on the spectrum, very much so. And she was kind of hiding behind her mom the whole time, watching what was happening. And when she saw her mom crying so badly, she looked up at her mom, looked at me, looked at mom, looked at me, and just was shaking like she couldn't stand it a moment longer. And she just dashed out from behind her mom and took my hand and began to pat her mom on the shoulder with my hand, as if to say to me, do this. So I just started to kind of pat the mom on the shoulder, and the girl dashed back behind the mom, and we prayed for a little while longer, and the mom was still weeping, and the little girl looked at the mom, looked at me, looked at the mom, looked at me, couldn't stand it, and she came out a second time and grabbed my hand, and she began using my hand to wipe away her mom's tears, as if to say to me, do this. And there are certain boundaries I just don't cross. I would never do that. But that little girl was basically teaching me how to be a priest. And afterwards, as I reflect on it and talk to some other people about it, they said to me, and I believe them, they're right. They said, that wasn't a little girl that grabbed you by the hand. That was God. That was God teaching you what kind of priest he wanted you to be. That was a God moment for me. And I could have lived on those church steps forever. I could have stayed in that moment forever. And whenever I go back to that moment, like I am right now, I know that then and now I am in the presence of God. I'm on that mountain with him. I'm seeing life beyond life. I'm seeing what resurrected life looks like. I invite you on this second Sunday of Lent to look into your life. We look into our lives and ask ourselves, where has been my God moment? All of us have had one. God has revealed himself in one way or the other to all of us. What has been my God moment? And what was it that God was revealing to me about himself and about myself in that moment? Let's go to that God moment and let God once again speak to us.